Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 3 of the Phil Likes Fights podcast. I'm your host, Philip. Welcome back. This upload's going to be a little bit later than I would have hoped, but ultimately I wanted to get this out there. I wanted to have it at least before this Matchroom card that's starting up now in a few hours, but it is what it is, I suppose. It's not even that big of a show, if I'm being honest, and if I didn't cover it at all, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but obviously, since the last show, we've suffered some pretty horrific news. George Foreman passing away at the age of 76. I think that it's appropriate to start the show by acknowledging the kind of man he was, the kind of figure he was for the sport of boxing, for everything that he contributed to making boxing more relevant in the public eye, and for everything he did in his own life which made him a commendable person. You could argue, in fact, even that George Foreman was a man that had the privilege of living multiple different lives, winning the gold medal at the Olympics, going on to become a feared heavyweight champion that operated on guts and strength. Ultimately, got broken by Muhammad Ali, went through all sorts of trials of endurance, like the Ron Lyle fight, ultimately decided to step away from the sport, became a pastor, started up a youth center, and then, of course, realizing that in order to support his goals in life financially, he'd have to put the gloves back on, and went on a second heavyweight run in the 90s to become champion once again. Most boxing historians will tell you that the 1970s and the 1990s are the two greatest decades ever in heavyweight boxing, and this man somehow found a way to become heavyweight champion of the world in both eras, knocking out both champions he fought by knockout. It's really commendable. And then, of course, retirement, becoming a commentator on HBO, the Foreman Grill, which generated over $200 to $300 million for just himself. It's a wild, wild story, and if if you don't think that the George Foreman story is one of the most fascinating stories of the last century, you don't really understand the human experience because he's just he's he's a larger than life figure, and boxing lives and dies by the stars that are in the sport, and George Foreman is the ultimate star. So thank you, George Foreman, for everything. I hope you've got a grill up there in heaven, and I wish I had got to meet you because you are truly, truly an inspiration. All right. On that somber note, let's move on and get to the regularly scheduled programming. So, last weekend, which now feels like an eternity ago because of how life happens, George Kambosos fought Jake Wyllie. Hey, remember this? So for those who don't know, these are my predictions from last weekend or last week. These are not the official results that had occurred on that card. I'm going to go over what I picked, why I picked it, and what I make of the fights how they happen. So, George Kambosos beats Jake Wyllie by unanimous decision. I was exactly correct. My analysis was exactly correct. Not to pat myself on the back, because I'm going to have to take a couple of L's here coming up. But look, I figured Jake Wyllie, he looked big, and I said he was going to look big. He was younger, much younger. I said that was going to be a factor. And the fact that he was training for a fight coming up in April, I think you saw all of those things play relevant factors and contribute to Wyllie having a fun performance, but George just being slightly better in all areas and cruising to a decision. Of course, I would bring up, I wonder what's next, but it seems pretty obvious. June 21st in New York City, most likely, against Richardson Hitchens for the IBF World title. I think that's a ridiculous fight. Richardson Hitchens really needs a boost in his profile. I mean, maybe Kambosos just brings that name value and low risk that it makes for the perfect fight for Hitchens' career, but I don't know, man. It also just seems like George Kambosos getting yet again another opportunity that is far beyond anything he can provide skill wise. But let's move on here. Sky Nicholson, I had her by unanimous decision. Ultimately, Tiara Brown wins by decision. I mean, I was wrong, of course. Sky Nicholson did not win, but I didn't poo poo on this fight for 1 second. I said this was a perfectly legitimate fight. I said Tiara Brown is a legitimate title contender, and it doesn't surprise me that she won in an upset, a big upset. But it didn't boggle my mind. There were so many people that said, "Oh, Sky Nicholson, will she even get punched?" And I was like, "Of course she's gonna get punched. Of course. Like, you don't think Tiara Brown's gonna hit her at all? Like, this isn't these other people that Nicholson has fought. This is someone that was really 18-0, 11 knockouts coming into this fight. I thought that was valuable. I ultimately thought that the main reason why Brown wouldn't win is because I figured she just needed one more fight at the highest level of experience. Turns out no. Turns out she was able to rise to the occasion in a way that was very impressive. Good on her. Apparently, in the aftermath of this fight, we found out that there is no rematch clause for this fight, which means if this fight does happen again, it'll have to be just made by the promoters. But Tiara Brown could go on to do bigger and better things. We'll have to see. Of course, Eddie Hearn is probably desperately going to push for a Sky Nicholson rematch. That remains to be seen. Okay, Sugar Neeks, Trinica Johnson knocking out Nina Hughes. I had her by decision, but ultimately the fight played out pretty much as I thought, except Nina Hughes was really showing her age. I figured 42 or 43 years old for Nina Hughes. Sugar Neeks, I think just 29 or 30. Or those ages are about comparable. But not only was Trinica Johnson the one that won their first fight, she was also much bigger despite being in the same weight class, and she's also much younger. And I said that her hustle would ultimately get the job done. Well, she hustled her to a stoppage win. Very impressive. Moving on, Tara Moana knocks out Singh in the first round. I mean, what am I really supposed to say here? Of course that was going to happen. They're probably going to give Tara Moana like 5 more layups before I have to really consider if he might lose. I mean, the guy, went toe-to-toe with Bahadur Jalalov back in the Paris Olympics. I was sure he would beat a guy like Singh. And then Iman Katayev going the distance for the first time in his career, now 10-0, 9 knockouts against Palacio. And I had said Palacio is super durable. Obviously, he went the 12-round distance with Kevin Lele Saggio. I thought that maybe the difference between super middle and light heavy would result in Palacio being weak enough later in the fight to get a late knockout. Ultimately, we go to a decision for Mankatayev, but very good fight in his career, very good developmental fight. He's going to learn a lot from that fight. Good performance by him. I'm glad to see him stepping up each and every time and facing credible opposition in the light heavyweight division. All right, let's move on here. We had an offering by Sebastian Fundora and, of course, Cordell Booker. Now, look at how funny this is, right? So I have Elijah Garcia by decision. Then I said Ramos TKO 4, and I said Fundora TKO 9. If I had just swapped those around, I would have been right on the money. But let's get into it. Elijah Garcia winning by unanimous decision. Of course, this is a disgrace. This is a sham. But I figured there was almost no chance that they were going to give that fight to Terrell Gausha. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. Look, Terrell Gausha, sadly, has a style which is either very low output, so he loses clearly, or just not high enough output or high enough power punches that he can lose very close decisions where the judges don't favor what he's doing. And I think you saw that almost exactly. Despite having a knockdown, despite constantly beating up Elijah Garcia with counters, he was off the ropes, and the judges just saw Elijah Garcia moving forward, and they decided to give him enough rounds to not only negate that knockdown, but pull ahead of it. Ridiculous scorecards, but Elijah Garcia moves on. His career is not yet over. Of course, they were saying on the broadcast booth that Garcia was going to retire if he doesn't win a world title in the next year. Look, I know middleweight is about as hollow as those Easter Bunny chocolates that you get, where it looks like, oh, this is good. Inside it's all hollow. Yeah. I know middleweight is literally that hollow. And even then, I'm not sure Elijah Garcia touches a world title. I think Erislan Lara can knock him out. I think Carlos Adames can easily cruise to a decision. And I think Jeanne Bekele beats him pretty clearly in any way he wants. So, but fun fight, good fight to watch. So that was good. All these fights were pretty good to watch, except basically for the next one here, Jesus Ramos Jr. Yeah, Guido Schramm, who was just knocked out in 6 rounds by Vladimir Hernandez. The fact that Ramos really didn't clean him up right away is a little bit concerning, if I'm being honest. The only caveat I will provide, though, is that Ramos literally fought like a month before this, and the fact that he's a top 10 guy in his division fighting a month apart is actually pretty commendable in terms of the activity aspect. And when you are fighting that often, sometimes you're not going to have the best performances because you had a shorter training camp. This was also a late replacement. Originally he was not going to be fighting Guido Schramm. There are very many excuses that I'm actually willing to make here in the case of Ramos Jr. Ultimately, this was not a close fight at all. Schramm had very few moments. And for Ramos Jr., he's not going to get the winner of the main event. I know people want to pretend like that's a possibility, but he's definitely a player in the 154-pound division. That was true before this fight. It's still true now. Good enough performance, and maybe he should just take a little bit of time off, heal up any lingering injuries, get yourself in good proper shape, and when a big name at 154 pounds calls you up, then you could take it. Honestly, I would like to see him versus Bakhram Murtazaliev or Murtazaliev. We really need to clear that up. But I think it's Murtazaliev because it's also, by the way, Beterbiev. It's not Beterbiev. I've learned this recently. So I think it should be Murtazaliev. I'd like to see him versus Ramos Jr. on the same card as we're going to get to, Fundora versus Xander Zayas, which is probably likely next. And the main reason why it's next is because Fundora has now successfully defended his unified titles versus Cordell Booker. Getting him out of there in 4 rounds, I thought very impressive. Again, whether we're talking about Sebastian or Gabriela, the Fundora siblings are offensive dynamos. They come at you and they are throwing knives at you, hatchets, axes, swords, claymores. They've got every kind of blade, and they are just going to spin around tornado style. And what are you supposed to do? They're attacking you from all these angles, uppercuts from the waist, the ability to just maul you on the inside. Everyone, I constantly hear, why doesn't Fundora just jab at range? He could win every fight ever if he just sat 3 feet away and jabbed them in the face. No, he wouldn't. One, because you can always time someone's jab, even if they have a longer jab. We saw this with Usyk versus Fury. There's countless examples. But the other thing is, too, his jab, his long-range weapons are actually not that elite, and they're not that fast. And I think that if he were to adopt that style, it would actually leave him open. I like the closed-up shell, that ability to have his elbows basically by his waist, and he's harder to hit than you think. I know he was knocked out, but look, even in that Mendoza fight, he was doing really well. I really rate Fundora, I think, higher on average than most people. I think he is very good. And when you have the offensive skill set that he has, that can get you out of a lot of trouble. I'm looking forward to a fight between him and WBO mandatory Xander Zayas. I think a lot of people look at Zayas very much in the same way that they were doubting Fundora not so long ago, as, oh, Zayas, he's young, he's 21, he didn't fight anyone, all this stuff. Look, I think Zayas is very well schooled, And his last few fights against Slavo Spomer, his other opponents, I think that he's really showing how technically brilliant he is. And I don't think that Fundora is better than Xander Zayas technically. But boxing is not a technique game, it's a fight. And I think that Fundora can use a lot of the experience that he has and those offensive weapons to make Xander Zayas have to go through a lot of trouble. But that's a really good fight, and I'm looking forward to it. So give me Fundora Zayas, give me Ramos versus Murtazaliv, and give me Elijah Garcia versus, I don't know. If they want to do the Lara fight, man, oh man, but we'll see. All right, let's move on here. Pro Box card happened over the weekend. Let's get into it here. So I had said I've been picking Joshawn James, and then following my prediction of Joshawn James, proceeded to give a million reasons why James does not win and why Lester Martinez is better. And then that's exactly what happened. Look, ultimately, I was really nervous about Lester Martinez's headspace, about his physical condition. If you were hearing the things I was hearing about his talks of retirement, those sorts of comments, yeah, that's always a gigantic red flag. But ultimately, Lester Martinez goes out there and has a career best performance. Is that too much to say? I mean, he looked on fire. Excellent knockout. Completely shut down Joshawn James. Got him out of there like he didn't even deserve to be in there. And Lester Martinez is a real player at 168 pounds. I don't think he's in the Canelo running, but I think eventually, Canelo, he's going to start dropping more belts as he takes the sort of fights that he's taking here. And I think Lester Martinez could either pick up a vacant belt, or if someone like a Jaime Munguia or Edgar Berlanga picks up a vacant title, I would pick Lester Martinez to beat those guys in a year or so time. Really good performance by him. Guatemala, I think you got someone here. I hope it's not Ecuador. I'm pretty sure it's Guatemala. Also, there he is, man. The prince of action boxing. Vladimir Hernandez continues his run against Isaias Lucero by decision. Ultimately, I got a little bit hectic here with the KO6. I think it's just I'm such a big fan of this guy. I want the best for him. But ultimately, got dropped, came back, action fight. I mean, how do you not love Vladimir Hernandez? Really, really awesome fighter. A pleasure to watch each and every time. Good fight. And for Isaias Lucero, keep your head up. You had a really good performance. That was a very close fight. I would watch him again against someone else as well. Also, I didn't talk about this Jasmine Artiga versus Regina Chavez fight because I thought, 12-0-1, 8-4-3. I mean, I don't really know anything about these people. I'm very transparent about that, but the writing I thought was on the wall here. No, apparently ProBox was like, hey, you know what? We haven't had the worst robbery of all time recently. Maybe we should do that. And Jasmine Artiga got away with a really, really questionable decision. Basically didn't throw any punches and found a way to get a unanimous decision win, I believe. Unless it was like majority or something, but ultimately, yeah, that was pretty bad. And then I did highlight Louis Lefty-Coria. I thought that he was going to go out there and get a pretty nice upset against, don't have me blank. Come on, what's his name? The former champion. My goodness. Jesse Magdaleno. I was like, Jesse Magdaleno, he's on the way out. This is the perfect opportunity for Louis Coria to pick up a career best win in an upset that nobody's going to see coming. No, he went out there and got completely destroyed. So I guess I really don't know what I'm talking about, but I thought that was going to be a good fight coming in. And then Jesse Magdaleno was like, actually, you know what? I'm going to really train hard for this fight, and just completely mauled him. Good on Magdaleno. And if he gets the Stephen Fulton fight, my goodness, that would be really terrible. But all right, let's move on here to everyone's favorite segment, Who's That Boxer? What do you think? Who is it? Do you have a guess? Do you have an educated guess? A random guess? Well, I'll give you the answer, and that, of course, is the upset of the week here. Jeremy Hill upsetting Malik Montgomery on the OTX boxing card that had just happened this past weekend. I didn't even bother to cover this card. I thought that it was so straightforward. Of course, Malik Montgomery's going to win. You know, Jeremy Hill, we've seen him at a certain level before. We've seen him lose. And then I watched the weigh-in, and Malik Montgomery came in at 135 pounds. Okay. And Jeremy Hill came in at like 129.6. I'm like, oh, this guy is coming in either undersized or he botched his weight cut several pounds. I was like, not only was I going to pick this guy Malik Montgomery to win before all this, but now this guy weighs 6 pounds less. I thought the writing was on the wall. Nope, turns out that Jeremy Hill completely out hustled Malik Montgomery. Just too much, too ferocious, too powerful. Not really so much too powerful, but way better timing, way better shot selection, and just completely out hustled Malik Montgomery every single round almost, and got a massive upset win. Credit to him. I hope he gets a big opportunity in the lightweight division. Really, really good performance. Was not seeing that at all. So shout out to you, Jeremy Hill. All right, let's move on to the fights this weekend. Now, here we go. So this is, as of recording today, March 28th. Here's the Pat Brown Show, a next-gen card offered by Eddie Hearn. Next-gen, I think, is, by the way, a good idea. I like that concept. I like that it's sort of, they're almost branding it like, look, we know that this card is essentially just full of prospects. If you're expecting world-ranked contenders, watch something else. But I like cards like this. Not every card has to have the stakes of the world behind it. Sometimes you can just have a couple of rising talents on a card, and that's it. You know, obviously there's much bigger fights happening this weekend, but I think this is an all right card. Obviously, the main event, I think, is quite absurd. The fact that there's a minus 5,000 favorite in Pat Brown in the main event is kind of ridiculous. I don't think that any main event should be over the, like, minus 1,000 mark, really. But let's get into it here. And I'm going to start it off by saying Pat Brown wins by knockout in the first round. Everyone's going to claim that Pat Brown is the greatest thing since sliced bread. They're going to say, look at how impressive that was, all this stuff. I don't think his opponent's decent. His previous opponent was actually much, much better. I wish that guy had not pulled out. But here we have Grandone, who I believe is coming off of 4 back-to-back losses. I think Pat Brown's going to come out like a bat out of, you know, the furnace or whatever. Look to just land every punch he can, and I think he'll be able to get I think it's Grandone. Get Grandone out of there, because I believe he's Argentinian. Okay, that's that. We also have Cameron Vong. I'm going to go with him by 8th round knockout over Jordan Flynn. This fight has had a lot of build-up. This has been scheduled now for 3 separate times. I think once Vong pulled out with injury, then Flynn had pulled out with injury. We finally have it. Obviously, look, Vong's last fight was a robbery. He did not beat Gavin Gwynn. The only thing is, if I'm supposed to believe that Jordan Flynn is either of equivalent or better skill than Gavin Gwynn, I just cannot do that. I think that this is the perfect bounce back opponent for a guy like Cameron Vong. I think that it's pretty clear what level Jordan Flynn is at, which is fringe British level. Obviously having a draw and a win over Kane Baker, but in 11 pro fights, he's barely getting any stoppages. Yes, he's fighting the kinds of British journeymen that come in just to win, but still, I think he suffers from a lack of power. I think he's undersized in this fight. I think Vong, bigger, stronger, younger. And even having a robbery decision against Gavin Gwynn, the fight optically was pretty close, and I still think that that's more impressive than anything I've seen from Jordan Flynn to this point. Give me Vong, late rounds knockout. All right, let's move on here. So originally in this fight here between Farnhill and Dickinson, I was leaning towards Farnhill. I ultimately did more tape study, and I think that Dickinson will win by knockout in the 7th round. I just think that he has a better amateur background, better overall shot selection. I know that he's coming up from middleweight to 168, but apparently the weight cut was absolutely dreadful for him. I sort of understand that. He looks like he could fill into the higher weight class, and I just think his punches have a little bit more ferocity on them. Give me Mark Dickinson here to beat Reese Farnhill. And let's move on to a show that I think has a lot more gravity to it, more gravitas. Of course, Michaela Mayer, Sandy Ryan, coming off of their Fight of the Year contender last time out that I had the privilege of attending. Sandy Ryan was the champion going into that one. Now, of course, Michaela Mayer is the one with the belt. And before I get into my predictions here for this card, can we just acknowledge how hilarious it is that Sandy Ryan is covered in red paint on the poster? I mean, amazing, amazing stuff. This is like my favorite poster of the year. Of course, if you are not aware, in the prior fight between Michaela Mayer and Sandy Ryan, as Ryan was leaving the Fighter Hotel to make her way to the venue, someone got out of a car with a red paint can and doused Ryan with red paint before that had happened. Of course, there were all sorts of allegations about this is Michaela Mayer's doing. That was someone on her team. That sort of has all faded away at this point. Michaela Mayer has distanced herself from those allegations. I think that she's making it pretty clear that she had nothing to do with it. Obviously, of course, that is a very odd thing for someone to do a hit and run paint style. And yeah, I mean, hopefully we don't get another controversy like that. Of course, this is happening now in Las Vegas, not in New York. So let's see about that. But ultimately, I'm going to go with revenge here. I'm going to go with Sandy Ryan. Unanimous decision. I thought she even had a case to win their first fight. I think you factor in that. I do think that I don't want to overblow the paint factor because obviously getting paint thrown on you is not the most horrific thing in the world. But fighters, so often you hear that the fight is won and lost in the mentality of it, right? I ultimately think that that is enough to shake someone up pretty harshly, and that if Sandy Ryan coming into this fight realizes, look, that shook me up, but I've learned from it. I got through it. I even almost won that fight the first time around. Give me Sandy Ryan to win by unanimous decision. I think that the big difference between her and Michaela Mayer is that Ryan punches tighter. Michaela Mayer tends to overextend on a couple of her punches, tends to not land on the cleanest, best areas. And give me Sandy Ryan to just bring the pressure. I know Michaela Mayer also brings the pressure, which is why when the two of them fight, it results in Fight of the Years. But I'm going to go with a very similar looking fight in which Sandy Ryan just makes her case a little bit clearer in the necessary rounds to pick up a unanimous decision. Really good fight. And honestly, there could even maybe be a trilogy out of this because the only other thing that you can do after the winner of this fight is fight Lauren Price. And I think Lauren Price is the best in class in this division and would beat either one unless if Michaela Mayer or Sandy Ryan can really separate themselves from the other girl in this fight, I'll consider picking whoever can do that feat to beat Lauren Price. But as it stands right now, if it goes how I predict, which is a sort of, similar fight to the first one, a competitive venture, I think Lauren Price will beat the winner. But let's not jump the gun here, but let's talk about Brian Norman Jr. I have here KO in the 7th. Ultimately, I think I'm actually going to backtrack from this. I didn't change this graphic before the show. I think Derek Cuevas actually is pretty credible of a opponent here, especially for a first-time title defense. Of course, Brian Norman Jr. still very young, I believe. I think only 25 years old. No, still 24 years old. Derek Cuevas, quite good, quite offensively minded. I think that he's going to bring a lot of fits to Brian Norman Jr. even in a defeat. I would hedge this and I would say maybe even later. But honestly, I could just see Brian Norman getting a clear-cut unanimous decision where he had to defuse the bomb, which is Cuevas, and perhaps that goes to the distance. But I guess for the sake of the graphic, KO7 is still on the table, but it would be impressive if he does do that. Let's see what the WBO welterweight champion here can produce. Also on this card, Bruce Carrington fighting a man that he has been scheduled to fight before in Enrique Vivas. I think that Bruce Carrington is going to cruise control to a comfortable unanimous decision. I think perhaps he can get Vivas out of there. But Enrique Vivas has been in there with some pretty credible opposition at the world level, has not been stopped to this point, I believe. So yeah, let's go Bruce Carrington by decision, and then hopefully he gets into a world title fight later this year so we can see what he is really about. Also on this card, you have Delante Tiger Johnson, Emiliano Vargas. Those are things to watch out for too, but I believe that both of their oppositions are not in the area where I'm pondering if they win or lose. I think it's pretty clear that they'll win. Let's move on here to the rematch. William Zepeda versus Tevin Farmer. I mean, I still want to talk about how optically hilarious it is that William Zepeda claims that, well, it's not that he claims that he's the mandatory, but he's the mandatory. He has the golden ticket to fight Shakur Stevenson, and instead he takes fights like this. Look, obviously the last fight was controversial, but it was for an interim title. You gutted out the win. I don't know how do you take this fight if you're confident that you beat Shakur Stevenson? You're clearly saying, I need to rematch a guy that I just beat, even though I agree it was not a good decision that should have probably gone to Tevin Farmer, or Zepeda wins by a round, but still, bad decision or bad performance. Ultimately, you have this fight not happening in Saudi Arabia. It's happening in Cancun. I think that puts the ball in Zepeda's court here. I think Tevin Farmer kind of really overperformed expectations. For those reasons, I'm going to go with Zepeda by TKO in the 11th round. It sort of sucks to say here. Ultimately, Tevin Farmer, really great story, really good run as of late. Obviously giving both William Zepeda, the lightweight boogeyman, and Raymond Murataya very, very difficult fights here. But I just think the fact that this will be in Mexico, this will be in more familiar territory for Zepeda. You don't have to worry about traveling to Saudi Arabia. You don't have to worry about all these factors. And I'm just going to hedge by a very, very late stoppage. Even one, if I'm being honest, that might be, Farmer's, he's a little bit gassed. He's looking for his areas to rest. And Zepeda just jumps on him. And the ref says, oh, I've seen enough, even though it's arguably a bad stoppage. That's sort of how I'm leaning right now. But let's see, because Tevin Farmer could win this. It's quite the challenge to surmount. But he nearly beat William Zepeda before. That knockdown that he landed was excellent. And if Zepeda does come away from this fight with the win, fight Shakur, man. Just fight Shakur. You're the mandatory. Shakur's right. Why does the champion have to call out the mandatory challenger? That's not the case in like any other division with any other champion. But of course, everyone will still claim that Shakur Stevenson's terrible and he's a runner and all this stuff. Meanwhile, he has to call out his own mandatory challenger. Completely ridiculous. All right, let's move on. Oscar Collazo is on this card versus Edwin Cando Hernandez is actually pretty good, despite his record being 13-2-1. Ultimately, Collazo I just think is an amazing, amazing fighter. So good at minimum weight. Very, very good fighter. I mean, I don't even know what else really to say. He's just so good. I mean, do you see his last fight? Just completely cleaned up a great, great champion in Nakotsubi Freshmart. Yeah, he should come away with this with a win, with a big knockout. And ultimately, I hope that he goes on to unify the division. I hope he unifies the division, whether that be with the winner of Melvin Jerusalem versus Shigioka, which we're going to talk about in a little bit coming up, or if it's with the other champion in this division, the IBF title holder. I'm blanking here, but I'm totally Pedro Tardoran. So hopefully they make either one of those fights. But for right now, Oscar Collazo staying busy. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. It's always better to be active than inactive. So yeah, let's go with knockout here. But I am really looking forward to this fight. You have two of the, I would argue, best female fighters actively in the world. You have, of course, Yokasta Valle, who just coming off of, a couple of wins, but I think more arguably known for her performance against the great Sinisa Estrada. And of course, Marlen Esparza, who is a very good champion in her own right. Ultimately, of course, give me Yokasta Valle by unanimous decision. I was making the case a few months ago that Yokasta Valle is one of the top 10 best female fighters in the world, pound for pound. And I just never was able to make that argument for Marlen Esparza, especially the fact that Gabriela Alaniz beat her pretty comfortably. And then, of course, Gabriela Fundora cleaned up Alaniz. But yeah, give me Okastavae, unanimous decision. In a good, fun fight. I have a lot of respect for both these ladies. Very, very good champions. Some of the best women's female fighters in the world, no doubt about it. All right, let's get to a couple of small offerings here to close out the show. This weekend, Angel Ayala is taking on Masamichi Yabuki. So, for those who don't know why this is such an excellent fight, you have Angel Ayala, who is the IBF flyweight title holder. Or is he? No, he's super lightweight. Oh, no. Oh, I don't want to come off as uninformed. I know the weights in terms of how many pounds they are, but then sometimes the... Okay, yeah, super lightweight. That is what I... Right? Or no? Flyweight. There we go. Okay, glad to have that cleared up. So yes, this is at the 112-pound weight division, flyweight. This is, of course, Angel Ayala, who is making the first defense of his title. He's coming off of a really great win, slicing through Deva Polinario in just 6 rounds. And that was a good performance by him, but Masamichi Yabuki is coming off of some excellent performances. Of course, a lot of people know him for his loss against Kenshiro Teraji, where he got knocked out in 3 rounds, but he also beat Kenshiro Teraji, who is now on the pound-for-pound list. He's coming off of an excellent win, knocking out Civetnati Nanshinga. Ultimately, give me Yabuki by knockout in the 9th, but you know what? I'm going to preface it with this. If this result does not happen, you know what the second most likely result is? Angel Ayala by knockout in the 9th round. I genuinely believe this is going to be an all-time action-packed shootout, and it's going to come down to just who's more defensively minded and who's really putting their offense together. Ultimately, I'm going to hedge with Masamichi Yabuki. I just rate that win over Kenshiro so much. And then he adds on top of that the Civetnati Nanshinga fight. I mean, it wasn't so long ago. It was 2 fights ago that we were talking about Angel Ayala as a, undeserving title challenger. I still don't believe that he beat Felix Alvarado. I thought that was actually on my college radio show. That was my robbery of the year. It was Angel Ayala versus Felix Alvarado. I thought Alvarado won that quite clearly. Give me Ibuki by KO on the 9th, but very good fight. And another very good fight, and one that Oscar Collazo, I hope, is going to be watching very closely. Melvin Jerusalem versus Yudai Shigioka for the WBC World Minimum Weight Championship. Of course, Melvin Jerusalem already having that loss to Oscar Collazo, but bounced back, provided an excellent upset against Yudai Shigioka. And ultimately, I've gone back and forth on this. Give me revenge. Shigioka by unanimous decision. Look, ultimately their first fight was quite close. I don't have a problem with Jerusalem winning the first fight. I think Shigioka is going to make the necessary adjustments here. I think that first fight was very winnable, and he doesn't have to change much to win a rematch here. If Shigioka wins, I think that honestly, that might make the Collazo unification a little bit harder to make, just because Jerusalem has already fought him. But even if you think about the mental aspect, right? Jerusalem already beat this guy. There's not a lot of motivation to prove that you're better than him when you already are. He'd much rather prefer that he's better than Oscar Collazo in that rematch. Whereas Yudai Shigioka, he's probably thought about is, I gotta beat Melvin. I gotta get him again. I gotta avenge that. There's, I think, a little bit difference in mentality, and I think Shigioka is going to gut out a hard-fought unanimous decision. And then finally, one of my favorite fighters in the modern era, Luis Alberto Lopez, the man that nobody thought was going to become world champion, the man that I predicted, El Venado Lopez. I predicted him in most of his big upset wins, especially his one over Josh Warrington to win the title. And here he is, comeback fight following Angelo Leo, where he suffered brain bleeding, I think, and brain hemorrhaging. It was a knockout of the year worthy shot. Ultimately, of course, I don't think that Eduardo La Fierita Montoya has a lot to stop him in that sense. And for all those reasons, I think Venado is going to get a nice, comfortable knockout in the 4th round. if Fernando has anything, he has his offense, and I think that this is going to be hopefully a good performance from him, but I think my heart is going to be a little bit crushed if he comes out there and does not look very good at all, but I don't think that'll happen. So ultimately, everyone, that's episode 3. It's been Phil Likes Fights. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I will see you next week, hopefully much sooner. But all right, enjoy the fights, everyone. Enjoy my predictions. Hopefully, I'm not going to lead you astray, and I will catch you later.